Word of Mouth is an adult story time presented by the Juliette Hampton Morgan Memorial Library. News stories are posted every month on the second Sunday at 2:30 p.m. If you enjoyed today's program, please consider liking and subscribing to our YouTube page or following our Facebook. As a reminder, some stories contain adult language and content. It is recommended you review stories before allowing younger audiences to listen.
Today I will be reading excerpts from Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This book is one of the materials reviewed for May's Open Book Club meeting. The Open Book Club is a monthly, no-pressure book discussion group. On the first Wednesday of every month, we get together over a Zoom meeting and share what we've read for the past month, what our thoughts on the materials are, and if we'd recommend others to read it or not. The Open Book Club talks about all different kinds of genres and formats. There's never any judgment on what you choose to read or what you choose not to read if you haven't read anything this month. My favorite feature of the Open Book Club is that even if you miss a meeting or several meetings in a row, you can hop right back into the next one without missing anything. The book club is for people who don't have the time or inclination to read along with a group, or who don't like the expectations of assigned readings. Every item discussed in the meetings is listed in the next month's newsletter, which is sent out about a week after the meeting. Newsletters can be sent directly to your email or picked up from the reference department of Morgan Library. Registration for the Open Book Club is required to get the Zoom link. To register or ask any other questions, call the reference department at 334-625-4982. Remarkably Bright Creatures. Day 1349 of my captivity. They do not see it. For weeks they have worked together. How do they not see it? I have searched my collection many times over, considering whether any of these objects might point them in the right direction, a useless endeavor. And now my collection is a mess. It spills out of my den, sloppy and disorganized, dangerous. My collection shall be exposed next time my tank is clean if I am not more careful, although I fear I may no longer be around next time my tank is cleaned. I must persevere for their sake. I cannot bear to leave this story unfinished as it is now, as I fear it will always be if I do not intervene to help them realize. Human gestation is approximately 280 days. Conception must have occurred very close to the night of the boy's accident, but the mother does not realize she is carrying an embryo until weeks later, months sometimes, in cases where producing offspring was not planned. I have seen this scenario play out countless times over the course of my captivity while observing the patrons that come and go. If Tova knew his date of birth, his last name, would that be enough? I must try. Why do I so deeply care that she knows? I am not entirely certain. But my own end nears, along with her time here. If they do not figure it out soon, everyone involved will be left with a hole. As a general rule, I like holes. A hole at the top of my tank gives me freedom. But I do not like the hole in her heart. She only has one, not three like me. Tova's heart. I will do everything I can to help her fill it. Some trees. The tower of tea towels threatens to topple as Tova adds another to the top. Stacks of this sort cover the floorboards of her attic. Above, the polished beams are bathed, cathedral-like, in the afternoon light streaming through the large picture window. Tova's disposition, however, is less sunny. She cannot stand piles. Will was a notorious maker of piles. Receipts, stale mail advertisements, magazines he'd already read twice, scraps of paper upon which he jotted some note or another that even he couldn't decipher. In Will's view, these things needed to be kept. When Tova would nag him about the clutter, he'd simply collect the detritus into a stack, square off the corners, and plop it on the edge of some counter or credenza with a satisfied remark. See? Nice and tidy. Tova would wait until he dozed off in the recliner, and then, with a sigh, would shepherd the junk to its proper place, which was occasionally the filing cabinet, but more often the trash bin. When Will's cancer generated enough paperwork to overstuff the small cabinet, Tova bought another, expanding her filing system so each page from the insurance company, every medical bill, had a proper home. Caring for her husband as the cancer worked its way through his organs may have taken over her life for a time, but she would not tolerate the paperwork taking over her kitchen counters. Quite a disaster, isn't it? Tova directs this question at Kat, who patters up the attic stairs. A gray tail appears a moment later, popping up like a question mark behind a box. The cat winds his slender body between the stacks with impossible grace, arriving at a patch of sunshine near Tova's side without disturbing so much as a speck of dust. He casts a bored glare before lowering onto his side and closing his yellow eyes. Tova smiles, allowing a smidge of her crossness to melt away. I suppose you tromped all the way up here to nap on the job, didn't you? She strokes Kat's side, which starts to rumble, purring. The room is divided into 3 categories. It's a start, anyhow. A system. Tomorrow, Barb and Janice are coming over with Janice's son, Timothy, and 2 or 3 of his friends. Voluntary labor for all of this sorting and hauling. Tova promised to order pizza for everyone, even though eating delivery food when her freezer is full of casseroles seems indulgent. But she does need the help, and better for it to come from people she knows rather than allowing a team of strangers to descend upon her family's heirlooms. Besides, Barb and Janice have been calling non-stop offering to help. This will mollify them. The first category of items, and by far the smallest, is for things she'll take to Charter Village. A couple of Eric's old toy cars, a handful of photographs, what's left of her mother's porcelain tea set, which she fancies she'll take coffee in once in a while. It's quite a shame so much of this has gone unused for years, decades. The slip of tissue that had wrapped the saucer gets wadded into a ball and tossed into the section nearest the door. Trash. Here, too, goes a large volume of photographs and other memorabilia. Although it feels odd to discard these things, so meticulously saved, where else would they go? Janice suggested a storage unit, but why? There's no one left to want them. Then there's the largest pile, the donation pile. A truck from the local second-hand shop is scheduled to do a pickup next week. Most of Eric's toys are in this pile. Perhaps they'll be played with by someone else's grandchildren. Alongside the old toys is her mother's bone dinner china. It survived a trip across the ocean, so it should make it through a journey to the thrift shop downtown. Whether anyone will buy it once it arrives there is another question. First, she tried to give it to Janice, but Janice said she didn't have the room. Barb, likewise, apparently, does not have room among her elephants. She had considered offering it to Mackenzie, the girl who works the desk at the aquarium, or even the young lady who runs the paddling shop next to Jessica Snell's office. But young women don't want bone china anymore. They've no use for old Swedish things. They have their own dinnerware, probably from IKEA. New Swedish things. Also in the donation section are 5 wooden Dala horses. Straight-legged figurines with their delicate paintwork in shades of yellow and blue and red. The 6th one, the one Eric broke, has been missing for ages. She always thought perhaps she'd find it and repair it, but what good would that do now? She takes one of the horses out and studies it. If she takes them with her, the whole lot will be left at Charter Village for someone else to dispose of. Not even a muckle-toothed lawyer and his private investigator will be able to find someone who wants them. Still, the Dalla horses switch piles. They'll go with her to the retirement home. She picks up a stack of yellowing pillowcases. Her mother had hand-embroidered the roses along the hem. The sheets let off a musty puff as Tova plops them onto the nearest linen pile, to be washed, of course, before being donated. All of these things had been stored away for her to pass along someday, relics to be carried up the branches of the family tree. But the family tree stopped growing long ago, its canopy thinned and frayed, not a single sap springing from the old rotting trunk. Some trees aren't meant to sprout tender new branches, but to stand stoically on the forest floor, silently decaying. She unfolds the next item to be added to the pile, a linen apron, its sturdy fabric heavily creased. It's what her mother wore when she baked. Tova holds it close to her face. It smells sour, like flour turned bad. Folding up the fraying strings, she tries to put away the thought that's been nagging at her all afternoon. There was a girl. If Eric hadn't died that night, the girl might have been a daughter-in-law. Tova herself might have worn this apron when she taught her son's wife how to make his favorite butter cookies, then passed the apron along to her when the time came. Such nonsensical thinking must stop. Whoever she was, Eric hadn't cared for her enough to ever mention her. This last thought, as usual, stings. Kat's afternoon nap comes to an end when a horsefly hurls itself against the window, enticing the sleeping gray hunter into an earnest, if fundamentally pointless, hunt. Tova watches the cat leap at the window, pawing the glass, as the fly hovers unconcerned outside. "I know how you feel," she says, with a sympathetic nod. To know something is there yet be unable to grasp it is torture indeed. With an antagonized mew, Kat stalks off, winding back through the maze of stacks and vanishing down the stairs. Tova glances at her wristwatch. Almost 5. "Suppose I should think about supper," she mutters to no one, unfolding her aching joints from her low chair and picking her way through the mess. It isn't like her to leave a project half finished. A rush of rebellion swishes through her as she turns her back on the unfinished piles and, stepping lightly on her still tender ankle, descends the staircase. Egg salad sandwich is tonight's supper plan. Again. All week it's been nothing but egg salad. There was a coupon in last week's circular. Buy a dozen, get a dozen free. Tonight, however, she can't bear to eat another crumbly sandwich. It's true she's been doing her shopping in the morning lately. Not because she's avoiding Ethan and his coffee invitation. Of course not. She checks her watch again. She's fairly certain he'll be on shift now. She runs a hand down her face, which feels as worn as the relics in her attic, like the dust has settled into every crease and wrinkle. A friendly conversation with the Scot would be nice right now. "I'm going up to the shopway," she informs Kat, who is now perched on the arm of the Davenport, no doubt depositing a layer of gray fur, which Tova will need to slough off with a lint brush later. Oh well, the Davenport won't be coming with her to Charter Village. Of course, it's far too large. And in any event, there are worse things than cat hair. A hot, thick haze has settled over Soul Bay, and a few bored-looking teenagers are encamped on the curb in front of the grocery, languid and lazy under the baking sun, limbs sprawled, reminding Tova of a collection of gangly insects. She tuts as she steps over one young man's extended leg on her way to the front door. The door chimes, And Ethan Mack glances up from his register with a broad grin and an "Afternoon, Tova." An icy, air-conditioned blast sends Gooseflesh shivering up Tova's arms. She ought to have brought a sweater. "Good day, Ethan." Suddenly, out of any other words, she hurries towards the produce aisle. There the temperature is even more frigid. She scoops a bag full of gleaming Rainier cherries and places it in her basket. Then, after a hesitation, fills the second bag. Cherry season is so short, and these do look delightful. "Wow, $3 a pound! What a steal!" Tova turns to find a familiar woman nibbling on a cherry. It takes her a moment to realize it's Sandy from Mary Ann's luncheon, Adam Wright's lady friend. Unlisted in the phone book, Adam Wright. "Oh, Mrs. Sullivan, right?" She swipes juice from her mouth with the back of her hand, then grins sheepishly. "Nice to see you again. I guess you caught me in the act here." "No need to worry, I won't alert the authorities," Tova says with a small smile. "Pleasure to see you, Sandy. I hope you and Adam are settling in well." Guilt nags at her, remembering how she drove through that neighborhood with the newly built homes, hoping she might happen to catch one of them fetching the mail or mowing the lawn. People deserved privacy on their own property. She, of all people, should appreciate that. And even if she had managed to catch them, who is to say that Adam remembers anything more about Eric's purported sweetheart than he let on at the luncheon? The night in question was, after all, 30 years ago. And yet Tova cannot shake his words. She shivers again. Sandy plucks another cherry from the pile and pops the stem off. "Thanks, and yes, it's starting to feel like home. It's just beautiful up there. Great to be out of the hustle and bustle of the city." Cleaving the cherry in half with her teeth before picking the pit out, she makes a guttural mmm sound and gives her fingertips a chef's kiss. "Seriously, you should try one. They're out of this world." "Hi, you there! No free samples!" Ethan booms into the produce section, wagging one of his meaty fingers as he approaches. Sandy's face goes ashen, but Tova smiles and shakes her head. Ethan's eyes are sparkling. He gently nudges poor Sandy on the shoulder. "I'm just pulling your chain. Won't no one be the wiser if you help yourself to a few. Brilliant season for cherries this year, isn't it?" Sandy releases a nervous laugh. "Whew, I thought I was about to get banished from the town's only grocery store." "Of course not. We're a welcoming lot here, aren't we, Tova?" Tova inclines her head. "I should say so." Ethan chuckles and hooks his thumb into his apron straps. "Well, I'll leave you ladies to your shopping and sampling. Give me a shout when you're ready to check out." With a cheery nod, he turns and lumbers over to a nearby cantaloupe display where he busies himself straightening the mountain of melons. "This town sure has its characters, doesn't it?" Sandy muses, watching him. Adam always tried to describe Sowell Bay's, well, uniqueness, but I must admit I didn't understand until I came here myself. "Yes, well," Tova studies the tile. She's probably included as one of the town's characters. "You know, I never thought I'd live in a small town. Everyone's so friendly, but also so, I don't know, up in everyone else's business." We prefer to say we care for one another. A tight, thin laugh escapes Sandy's coral-colored lips as she lofts a bag of cherries onto a nearby produce scale. Adam insists I'll get used to it. "I'm sure Adam is correct." Tova forces a smile. "What do people gab about at Charter Village? Will she be a character there, too? Perhaps she'll meet someone who is friendly with Lars. Would that be a good thing or a bad thing?" "Speaking of Adam," Sandy leans in and shifts in her jeweled sandals, as if suddenly she'd rather not be in the produce section of the town's only grocery store right now. I feel like I should apologize for his behavior at the chop house. Drinking like that at noon? But he's been under so much stress with the move and at work, and Tova cuts in. It's quite all right, dear. She means it. Right. Sandy still looks deeply abashed. But there's one other thing about that conversation. Tova waits for her to continue, uncomfortably aware of her heart's increased pace. He remembered her name. That girl your son was seeing, I mean. The piles of cherries blur into a swirling sea, pink and red. Tova leans on a produce scale, bracing herself against this sudden dizziness, her brain now running mad circles around the words. The girl has a name. Mrs. Sullivan, are you okay? Quite, Tova hears herself rasp. Okay, Sandy hesitates, sounding unconvinced. Adam didn't think I should say anything, but I just figured if I was in your shoes, if I had lost my child and there was a bit of information I hadn't known, even something small, you would want to know. Tova allows her eyelids to squeeze shut, trying to slow the spinning. Anyway, her name was Daphne, or so Adam said. He couldn't remember her last name, but he did say she went to his high school. Daphne, Tova repeats. The name is thick and lumpy on her tongue like an old piece of chewing gum. A long moment passes. Finally, Sandy murmurs, Well, now you know, I guess. Tova watches her pick up her grocery basket. The skin is pulled tight around the woman's watering eyes. Thank you, Sandy. With an awkward nod and a quick touch on Tova's arm, Sandy ducks away towards the front register. From the corner of her eye, Tova catches Ethan staring at her. He closes the gap between them, still holding a cantaloupe in each hand. What was that Sandy Hewitt just said to you? Tova frowns, suddenly feeling like a rosebud under a cold, dark sky, pinched shut. It was nothing. She said a name. It was long ago nonsense. She said Daphne, didn't she? Tova holds up her bag of cherries. I think I'm ready to check out. Can you take these to the register and ring them, please? There will be no supper tonight. 2 pounds of peak season Rainier cherries, along with a hasty collection of other grocery items, are abandoned on the counter in Tova's kitchen. Next to them, her pocketbook lies askance, right where it was carelessly flung instead of in its proper place on the hook by the door. Upstairs in the attic, Tova plows through the piles of linen and china, barely aware of the mess now. On the last shelf by the window, bottom row, is the book. Sowell Bay High School, Class of 1989. 30 years ago, she had pored through this volume, searching for something, anything, and it would be remiss to leave out that, on occasion, she or Will had revisited the yearbook in the decades between, whenever some small spring leak of nostalgia broke through their hardened dike. She has every photo of Eric included between its covers committed to memory. But Tova isn't looking for Eric this time. Her mouth feels numb and dry as she flips to the index. The print is so tiny that she needs her readers. Her fumbling fingers find them in the breast pocket of her blouse and jam them onto her face. She yanks in a hard gulp of air when she sees the name, and it stays there, caught in her chest, as she runs her finger down the columns of type, devouring every last word until she reaches the end of the Z's and releases a ragged breath. There is only one. Cassmore, Daphne. Pages 14, 63, and 148. This last chapter that I'm going to read has some spoilers, so if you do not want any spoilers, stop listening now. The very low tide. The revelatory bits swimming around in her mind crash into one another, begging to be linked together. There was a girl. Eric and the girl. Eric fathered a child that grew up, away, unknown. She can't believe she never saw it before in so many of Cameron's mannerisms. In that heart-shaped dimple on his left cheek, the one she always admired, although she could never put her finger on why. "You knew, didn't you?" she says to Marcellus in the bucket. "Of course you did." She leans down and touches his mantle again. "You're so much more intelligent than we humans give you credit for." Marcellus lays the tip of one of his arms across the back of her hand. Tova crumbles to the ground again, this time propping her elbows on the rim of the bucket. Once the hot, fast tears start spilling, she's powerless to stop them. Droplets pelt the surface as her thin shoulders heave, falling faster with each monstrous sob. No one is here. No one is looking. Throwing caution away, she allows the grief to course through her. Finally, the tears slow to a trickle, punctuated by hiccups. Her eyeballs feel hot and dry. How long does she remain in this state of unmitigated grief? It might be minutes or an hour. When she lifts her head at last, her shoulders stooped ache. "What am I going to do without you?" she says, dodging a hiccup, and he blinks his kaleidoscope eye, which is now more roomy than ever. He might only have weeks or days left, Terry had said. She sits up, swiping away the tears with the back of her hand. For that matter, what am I going to do with you? She stands and squares her shoulders, shrugging the soreness out of her back. "Come on, my friend. Let's take you home." If there were any straggling fishermen or late sunset walkers on the Sole Bay waterfront that night, they would have been treated to quite a sight. A 70-year-old woman, 90 pounds at best, pulling a 60-pound giant Pacific octopus in a yellow bucket down the boardwalk towards the jetty. Tonight, though, the only witnesses are seagulls, and they scatter from the trash bin, lobbing indignant squawks at Tova as she wheels Marcellus by. It is not a fast journey by any means, but Marcellus trails an arm out of each side of the bucket like he's riding in a car with the windows down. Tova laughs. The breeze feels nice, doesn't it? The tide is way out. Tova can barely hear the waves lapping on the rocks, it's so far out. It feels like it must be a mile away from the waterfront path. Moonlight gleams on 100 shallow pools, scattered like huge silver coins across the naked beach. "This is going to get bumpy," Tova warns. The jetty, an engineered break wall of rocks and boulders, reaches across the bare beach and eventually out to the water, curving gracefully like a ballerina's arm. On a summer afternoon, it will teem with beachcombers and adventurous picnickers, those looking for the most picturesque spot to sit and lick ice cream cones. Now it's empty but for a lone seagull posted at the very tip. Wheeling the bucket across the jetty's flat but pebbly top is no small task. Later, her back will certainly hurt. But finally, Tova and Marcellus make it nearly to the end, where the low tide water is at least a couple feet deep below the rocks. From the tip of the jetty, an arm's length away, the lone seagull glares at them and then lets out an atrociously loud squawk. "Oh, quiet you," Tova scolds, and the bird flaps off. She lowers to sit on a rock slick with salt water. Trailing a hand in the bucket, she clears her throat before commencing the short speech she's been rehearsing in her head during their journey down to the beach. "I must thank you," she begins, and he clasps her arm one last time. "Terry mentioned you were rescued. I suspect you might rather not have been saved, but I am glad you were." She blinks back tears. Not again. You led me to him, my grandson. Her voice falters on these last two words, but a warmth seeps through her at the same time. Two words she never thought she'd say. If only Will had been here to meet him. And if only Modesto wasn't 1,000+ miles away. You stole his driver's license, you naughty thing. She chuckles, and his arm squeezes her hand as she shakes her head. You tried to tell me, and I wasn't listening. Somewhere high in the night sky, an airplane cruises by, the faraway roar of its engine echoing over the calm bay. It's unfair that you spent your life in a tank. And I promise, Marcellus, I'll do everything I can to make sure your replacement is the most pampered, intellectually stimulated octopus. The weight of her own words hits her. She's not going to Charter Village. She can't. After a deep breath, she goes on. We must say goodbye, friend. But I'm glad Terry saved you, because you saved me. Slowly, she tips the bucket. It's about 3 feet down to the water. For a moment that seems extended in time before gravity catches up, Marcellus's arm remains wrapped around her hand as his strange, otherworldly body hangs in midair, his eye fixed to hers. Just as she's about to be pulled down with him, he releases and lands with a heavy splash in the night black water.